The mansion stood silent under the soft glow of the morning sun. Through the tall glass windows, light spilled across marble floors that had never known the touch of bare feet. In that vast silence, a faint sound echoed, the sound of soft footsteps and quiet humming. It was Maria, the maid, sweeping through the grand hall as she always did, careful not to disturb the sleeping master of the house. Her movements were graceful but heavy with exhaustion, her face pale and eyes red from sleepless nights. Yet even in her tiredness, she smiled to herself, a faint, broken smile that only those who have known pain and resilience could wear. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the beauty of unseen goodness, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us share more stories that touch hearts and remind the world that compassion still exists. For months, Maria had worked in that mansion, quietly, faithfully, and without ever asking for more than what was given to her. The mansion belonged to Adrian Cole, a man known in the city for his wealth, his cold demeanor, and his perfectionist ways. To his employees, he was distant and intimidating. To the outside world, he was untouchable, a symbol of success built on power, not empathy. And to Maria, he was the man who had unknowingly given her a chance to survive. No one knew that every night, after finishing her chores, Maria would walk to a small room at the far end of the servants' quarters, light a candle, and pull out an old notebook filled with tiny scribbles. Inside that book were songs, lullabies she wrote for a child she hadn't seen in 3 years. Her daughter, Elena, was the secret that defined her every heartbeat. Born out of love that ended too soon, Elena had been taken to a care center when Maria couldn't afford her medical treatments. She had promised herself she'd bring her back one day, once she had saved enough, once her life became stable again. But stability was a dream she only tasted in her prayers. Still, she worked. Every day, every night, without complaint, without rest. Adrian barely noticed her. To him, she was just another employee in a perfectly oiled household machine. But one morning, something unusual happened. As Adrian prepared to leave for a meeting, he passed by the corridor near the servants' quarters and heard something soft, a voice, a woman's voice, delicate and trembling, singing a lullaby. He paused. The melody was unfamiliar, yet it struck something deep inside him, an emotion he thought he'd buried long ago. He followed the sound quietly and found Maria kneeling beside her bucket of soapy water, singing softly while cleaning the floor. Her eyes were closed, her voice filled with warmth and sorrow. She wasn't singing for anyone there, she was singing for someone far away. And in that moment, Adrian felt something stir within him, something human. That night, he couldn't sleep. The image of the maid's trembling voice, her cracked hands, her closed eyes, it haunted him. The next morning, he decided to observe her. He told his staff he was feeling unwell and would rest at home. By noon, he reclined on his couch pretending to nap, while Maria quietly entered the room to clean. She thought he was asleep. As she dusted the bookshelf, she whispered softly, "If only I could buy Elena her medicine this month, maybe she'll smile again." Her voice broke, but she continued to clean, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. She stopped midway, looking at the family photos on the shelf, Adrian's late wife, his little boy. "You had everything," she murmured, "and still you lost it. Maybe we're not so different after all." Adrian's heart froze. He wanted to open his eyes to say something, but he couldn't. Her words, so raw and honest, sliced through the walls he'd built around himself. He hadn't heard his wife's name spoken aloud in years. His son was away in boarding school, too distant, too grown now to share the closeness they once had. And yet, here was this woman, this poor maid, carrying her pain with such grace, still finding the strength to be kind, to sing. That night, Adrian walked to the window of his study, staring out into the rain. He thought about his wealth, the houses, the cars, the success, and how none of it could fill the loneliness that had grown inside him since his wife's passing. For the first time, he wondered what real richness meant. Days passed, but the memory of that moment stayed. Maria never knew he had heard her secret, and Adrian never confronted her. Instead, he began to notice her small acts of goodness more closely. How she saved half her lunch to feed a stray dog outside the gate. How she comforted another maid who was scolded unfairly. How she smiled through her fatigue as if kindness was her only strength left. One evening, the mansion's staff gathered in the kitchen for dinner. Maria excused herself early, saying she had to run an errand. She left quietly, clutching a small envelope, her entire month's savings. She took the bus into the city and walked into a small hospital ward where a frail little girl with wide, innocent eyes lay waiting. "Mama," the girl whispered as Maria entered. "You came." Maria knelt beside her, kissing her forehead, whispering stories of angels, hope, and the stars she could one day wish upon. She gave the nurse her envelope and left quickly before anyone could see her tears. But that night, when she returned to the mansion, Adrian was waiting in the hallway. "Maria," he said softly, "you're late." She froze, apologizing, her voice trembling. But he didn't scold her. He only looked at her, trying to find the words for what he'd seen earlier that day, because he had followed her, driven by a feeling he couldn't explain. He had seen her with her daughter. Instead of confronting her directly, Adrian decided to act differently. The next morning, Maria found an envelope on her pillow. Inside was a note that read, "For Elena," and beneath it, a check with more zeros than she'd ever seen in her life. She stood there, speechless, her hands shaking. Her heart told her to return it, to prove her pride, her honesty, but her mother's heart whispered otherwise. This was not pity, it was grace, and grace, she knew, was something you never reject. Still, Maria hesitated. For days she couldn't bring herself to face Adrian, avoiding his gaze, her gratitude buried under the weight of humility. Until one morning, Adrian asked her to bring tea to the terrace. When she arrived, he was there, sitting quietly, watching the sunrise. He gestured for her to sit, a gesture that shocked her. Masters didn't sit with maids, but he wasn't speaking as a master. He was speaking as a man who had finally learned how to listen. He told her that he too had lost someone, his wife, and that pain had made him forget what compassion felt like. He told her that seeing her strength reminded him of what it meant to live for someone else. Maria wept silently, clutching her apron. She thanked him not for the money, but for the humanity in his words. From that day forward, things changed in the mansion. Adrian made sure Elena received the best care. He even arranged for Maria to bring her daughter to live in the estate's guest house, where she could recover surrounded by peace and comfort. The other staff whispered, surprised by their boss's sudden kindness, unaware of the silent connection that now bound two broken hearts in healing. Elena began to recover. Her laughter filled the mansion's empty halls, and every sound of her giggle seemed to bring light back into Adrian's once lonely home. Maria continued her work, but this time with joy, not desperation. She often caught Adrian watching from a distance, smiling faintly as the little girl played. Months later, one evening, as the sun painted gold across the garden, Elena ran to Adrian and handed him a drawing, a stick figure family with a tall man, a woman, and a little girl holding hands. "That's you," she said, pointing at the man. Adrian looked at Maria, who blushed softly. "She says you're our angel," Maria whispered. Adrian smiled, his voice low and warm. "Maybe it's you who are mine." Life, which had once felt like a burden of grief, had transformed into a quiet symphony of gratitude, love, and second chances. The mansion no longer echoed with emptiness. It echoed with laughter, music, and hope. And sometimes, when night fell, Adrian would pause by the servants' corridor and hear Maria's lullaby once again, the same one that had awakened his heart months ago. This time it didn't sound sad. It sounded like peace. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps stories of humanity and redemption alive. Before you go, comment below and tell us, what would you do if you discovered someone's pain hidden behind their silence? Because sometimes, all it takes to change a life is to truly see the person standing quietly in front of you.